All right, I have 8 o'clock. If we're streaming, I think we can go ahead and start this meeting. I call to order this special meeting of the Ridgefield Board of Education for Tuesday, July 6th. We can start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone can join me off mute for a few minutes here. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
to the flag
of the United States of
United
America,
States of America,
to the republic
to the republic
for which it stands,
stands,
one nation under God,
under God,
indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Now moving on to discussion and possible action item. First, the response from the parent survey.
I can share a screen, or John Mansfield, would you mind just sharing a screen for me? So while John pulls that up, if you remember at our last Board of Education meeting, we were asked to learn the sentiment of our families around mask wearing. At that time, we had received some emails and some emails to the board, and then additional emails to the Safe Return email, because we had created a safe return plan. You might also remember that we were required to create a safe return plan by June 23rd per requirements for our ESSER 3 ARP grant. And so we created that plan based on the information that we had at the time, which was a executive order and requirements from the State Department of Ed and the Connecticut DPH. Based on that safe return plan is where we received that feedback. I should have been clear about that, but we received that feedback from families about mask wearing. And so at our Board of Education meeting, Jonathan, you weren't here, but the board asked whether or not the emails were, shared the sentiment of the greater community. So we sent out a very simple survey. There were there are a lot more layers to the questions that we asked, but we elected not to ask them and stayed really focused on what information came from the board meeting, or we had at the board meeting at that time, which was really two questions. If RPS had the purview to make masks optional, would you like that option? Or would you like us to follow the Connecticut DPH guidelines requirements as of May 2021? And based on those two questions, we did not disaggregate by those questions by level, meaning that parents they did not have the option to respond differently for their kindergartner than for their 12th grader. So they could identify, I have a 4th grader, a 5th grader, and a 12th grader, but they could not respond differently. We did not ask multi-layers. As I said, to those questions, there were a lot of layers to both of them that we could have asked. We did not, because we really just were trying to get the sentiment per the board request. And we had a very quick turnaround, to be honest. So both of those things. So here's the data that we had as of noon yesterday. Over 1,700 surveys were collected. Again, those were that could have been multiple children within that number. So I could have had 3 kids in that number, or 1. And this is how it broke down by level. Kind of what we could have, and actually it was what we anticipated right from go. As soon as we hit the survey sent, we had about 2/3, 1/3, and that's kind of where it ended up. Since that time, also, I did share with the Board of Education that the interim acting commissioner of education, Charlene Tucker, did send a letter to superintendents on June 30th. It's attached actually to the packet. And really, I think there was a couple of goals in the letter. One was to let superintendents know that they're working to share out what's next for school districts. However, they are waiting for communication from a CDC before they communicate next steps for superintendents. I think what they also intended to do there for some school districts was to remind them that as of right now, we continue to be under the executive order and mandatory to have different guidelines within school buildings than we do in public settings. So that's the information that I have since the last time we've been together, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have. And just for clarity's sake, I will just identify the two questions that were a part of the survey. One was for the return to the 21-22 school year. Would you rather for your children, question one was to follow the Connecticut DPH, Connecticut State Department of Ed requirements as of May 2021, requiring all persons inside of school buildings to wear a mask. And the second one, which was to follow a mask optional rule for mask wearing inside of our school buildings if RPS has the purview to allow such an option.
Anybody have any questions about the survey itself or the results, responses?
John, would you mind just throwing it back up there just in case we need to refer to it? John Mansfield, thanks.
So basically,
Jonathan, I had a question.
Sure, go ahead, Ken.
Is it, Dr. So was it possible for a family to answer the survey more than once if you had a particularly strong view one way or the other?
So theoretically, yes. What we did initially was we tried to prevent that. So we had within Google, you can limit the responses to one, which then forces somebody to sign in. And what was happening is, I think what was happening was that when, let's say somebody opened it on their phone, and they didn't necessarily answer it, but then when they went to sign in later, again, it was saying that they already signed in, so they weren't able to complete the survey. So it was giving people a hard time. So then we took that limitation out, which was then open. So I actually did find a bit of a challenge with that, because we had folks that were not parents that had emailed and said, well, we want to weigh in because it impacts A, B, or C. And, you know, I shared that we could not do that. So yes, there was that possibility. Initially, we tried to limit that. I think we have a strategy for future surveys, which would be that I think families would have to use their children's email so that we can limit it. But in this particular one, especially with the quick turnaround that we wanted, and with the holiday weekend, we had to pull that limitation out. So that's a real thing that could have happened. I should have also said, once we sent the survey out, remember what those two questions were. We received a number of responses from different perspectives. So what I would say to you is that there are for sure varying perspectives in our community, and there's multi-layers to the varying perspectives. So we received a lot of feedback, and actually the board, I know that you read them all. So the feedback was varied, some feeling passionately about one side or the other, but then others saying, I wish the survey asked this, or I wish the survey asked that, because I would have answered this, or I would have answered that. I answered it because I have a 12th grader, but if my kid was a kindergartner, maybe not so much, or not, you know, we had it all different ways. So again, that was not the intention of the survey. It was to get the overall sentiment. But per the board, that was what the idea was. But I do think that there was some challenges with that. And I'm sure you all saw that with the number of communications that we received once the survey went out. And I mean, I don't know how many, but a lot. And a lot, even up until I think late last night, there were a lot of communications. Some went to the board, some went right to the safe return box, and some just went directly to me. If they referred to the Board of Education at all, I did forward them to the board and or encourage that individual or individuals to reach out to the board.
Thank you.
So I guess, in a nutshell, this is a temperature check of the community and their thoughts around this. It's not, certainly we wouldn't make any kind of public health decisions based on a survey anyway. But the way I'm looking at it, it's pretty 60-40. There's not really a strong one side or the other coming from the community at this time. And this was all around the idea of sending a letter to the state around basically hurrying up and giving us an answer as to what they expect in the fall, correct?
I think there were two pieces to that. I think, yes, there was for sure. I mean, the board could speak best about what they asked us to consider here, but there was definitely a sense of, and I feel it from families, that whatever the decision is, families need to make a decision, right? What's best for their family, regardless of the perspective. And I think there is that sentiment out there for sure that we just want to know so that we can make a decision. And so there was clearly from the board, let's find out what's taking the state so long, too long. I'm paraphrasing, but what's taking them so long? Can we get a sense of where we're going for the fall for sure? And then I think a second piece of it was that the board had been receiving communications from some families, at least, that said, we'd like masks to be optional. And so is that the overall sentiment, or is that because we sent the safe return plan out, or so they wanted a temperature check around that? And again, I'm paraphrasing so others can speak, but I would say generally that's what I heard.
Sean?
Just an observation and then a question. So I was at the RHS fireworks last night with about 3,000 of my closest friends. Not a mask in sight, not a mask. Well, maybe I counted all of them on one hand, and I was in charge of communications and stuff. I have my radio still here. So I was roaming. I was present everywhere. The kids were not social distancing. They were playing as if everything was normal. And I'll note that a couple of the parents that I saw were ones that wrote letters in favor of mask policy enforcement. So I found that interesting as a data point. Secondly, the question is, and I asked this during the meeting last week, I think it was, why are we treating healthy vaccinated teachers as if they're sick? I still don't understand that. That doesn't flow with what the CDC has suggested for vaccinated people. And I just don't get the policy.
So let me respond to the first part. The second part, Sean, I'm not sure that I'm best equipped to answer that, but the first part, I actually think that I can answer, at least partly. Right now, if our children were outside and moving, they would not need to wear their masks. Based on, again, I'm not weighing in whether it's
does that include social distancing, hugging?
So we wouldn't encourage hugging. Actually at all, but but at least right now, if they're moving, they would not need to wear their masks. So that has been in place since around that May time as well. Outdoors, again, the policy has been different indoors, which is why with our Bridgeport program, we're trying to get kids outside as much as possible. With respect to vaccinated staff, I don't know. I don't really know the answer to directly to your question, but I also don't know if the State Department is going to weigh in differently for vaccinated staff. We do have the option right now to ask our staff if they are vaccinated. That is something that it's within our purview once we get to that step. So I don't know if there's going to be layers, Sean, to what the State Department of Ed says. And I don't know for sure, but I would anticipate that there probably will be some layers, whether that's elementaries looks one way and secondary looks another way, or vaccinations versus non. I imagine there'll be layers, but as of right now, I can't directly answer that question. I'm just not equipped to.
I have a question. Can you hear me? This is Kathleen, because
Yeah, we can hear you, Kathleen.
I can't see myself. It came up differently today. Nevertheless, I'm glad we did the survey, because I think one of the things I said last week is that we were getting letters from people who didn't agree with the reopening plan. And we wanted to get a sense from the community, because I always think that if somebody disagrees with something, they'll write a letter. If they agree with what's going on, they usually don't. And obviously the answers gave us a little bit of that. But in reading the letters that came to us is something that I have said all along. Two very clear letters, one from our head school nurse and another from, I think, a pediatrician, who again, and I really said I wanted to listen to the science and to the health professionals, because I am not. And both of them strongly feel that we need to follow the CDC guidelines and the state guidelines and wait as these data come forward. And I support that wholeheartedly. I don't want to go against what the science and the health professionals are recommending. So I feel very strongly about that. And I'm glad that there were some parents, and I understand if it's hard not to wear, it's hard to wear a mask, but I want to go on the side of a health professional, not me, who is not.
Jonathan, can I speak?
Very good points.
Jonathan, can I speak?
Sure, Tina.
Okay, I agree with Kathleen. I read the emails. I have family who are in medicine, so I totally understand. This is not an easy decision. As Dr. De Silva said, I think it also differs because there is, if parents so choose, vaccination available for children 12 and up. And of course, if you have children younger, if you have children across the school levels, it becomes complicated, right? It's all, honestly, it depends on where you are, how you feel about this, how the pandemic has even personally affected you, your families, your extended families, your friends. It's such a personal decision because it plays out in so many different ways. So yes, I think this was great because it helped us understand where parents are. I heard from so many parents who did not email the board, as Kathleen said, because they agree, they didn't think they needed to because we were just following CDC or Department of Health guidelines. So I do want to acknowledge that is the reason they did not email. And that's why we're hearing from parents. Yes, of course, seeing the survey, obviously, yes, taking it the way it was, people could take it multiple times. I acknowledge that too. It is a divided topic. So my only concern is that I understand that parents need a decision. I do respect the fact that there are parents who want to know if masks are, who would like masks optional, or if you're vaccinated, masks should be optional. I get it. There needs to be some kind of good positive, if you will. And again, I'm not a doctor. I'm just sharing thoughts from my own family who are doctors, that if you're vaccinated, maybe it is okay. But again, this is not my call to make. But as a board, I think, and I may be speaking out of turn, and Jonathan, you can correct me, we're not dictating policy, right? We're just trying to collect information from our families and share that this is what our community feels. It's not personal from any one of us. This is what we did. We reached out to our parents. We asked a very simple two questions. This is generally the feeling of the community. They would like a decision quicker than sooner, maybe mask optional. Again, it's their decision. Eventually that will rule, right? If I'm clear about that, Department of Health and the guidelines will, for now, it could change. And like New Jersey went back and said it was up to the school districts, and that's a hurdle we'll probably deal with, God forbid, if it comes up. But I'm just talking as of currently, it is the Department of Health guidelines. So I understand, I would support writing a letter to the Department of Health and CDSC saying we would like a decision. This is what our parents feel, because that's what we're doing. We collected this to share what our community feels. It's not what we are dictating. We're not feeling this. And this is something I want to say because I've had texts, emails, and phone calls. The board is not going against science. The board is doing what we're supposed to do, collecting our community feedback. Again, I'm sorry I'm speaking for you, but I hope that's okay, Jonathan. You can correct
Absolutely.
me. We're just collecting community feedback. That's our role, because everybody tells us we don't listen to the community. We are actually trying to do that. And whatever we share, this is what we have currently. It was available. This was shared. Yes, it was a short turnaround time, but it was there. So we're collecting feedback and we're sharing. We're not dictating science. We're not debating science. We're not debating any professionals. We're just trying to voice what our parents feel further on. I have to say this because I've heard so much over the last week. Either side, I have, it depends. Again, I support each and every parent's choice in this. That eventually it's the parents, but we as a board collectively are trying to voice those concerns.
Sure.
I just wanted to make that I had to say that after the long week I've had.
Tina, this was not different than last summer. And very much last summer, we received feedback, lots of different feedback, again, varying. Everybody makes personal decisions about health and safety. As your superintendent, I would be saying to you, follow what the Connecticut State Department of Ed and the Connecticut Department of Public Health tell us to do for many different reasons, not only for liability, but for many different reasons, because those are the individuals right now that have more information than we do. And that could be for lots of different reasons. Again, that would be what I would be saying to this board. It doesn't mean that you don't express your opinion. It doesn't mean that you don't collect feedback. All of that is fine. But just as we created that safe return plan to very specifically to write a grant. That's why we wrote it. We would never have written that now. We wouldn't have, because this is what happens when you give people parts of information. they're wondering, they don't have the other information. What's going to happen with quarantine? You just said no virtual. What happens with masks? What is it going to look like? And the truth is, we don't necessarily have that information. If we began school today, this is what it would look like. That's all we could say. Unfortunately, we were asked to do something far in advance than we have the full information, which compromises, I think, our ability to communicate as thoughtfully as we could have. That said, we did communicate that it was a safer return plan for the purposes of writing the grant. Dr. Hanaway, I think you wanted to say something and I may have jumped in.
Nothing that dissimilar. I think, I continue to just be mindful of the impact of virtual learning on our elementary students, knowing that the likelihood of them having a vaccine available and the unknowns with what is known to be the most infectious variant in the United States now, the Delta variant, which has caused similar countries with high vaccination rates to go back into things like more restrictions than they had earlier in the spring because of the spread of the Delta variant. And the clarity around it is that persons who are vaccinated are very, very safe from it. And that's amazing news, but we just don't have information that we can expect, like we heard about 18 and up, like we heard about 12 to 18 in terms of when vaccinations will be available. And then to what extent parents feel comfortable vaccinating young children. And the remote learning experience was most detrimental to those children.
John, then Margaret.
I agree. The remote learning was awful. There's no other way to put it for some kids. We experienced that here. It wasn't great. Just kind of going in the Wayback Machines, because I've been involved in messaging from both the town, the region, and the state level since March 13th when we closed our schools last year. Everybody says follow the science, and the science is great, but our science, meaning here in the U.S., the science has been following the actual actions on the ground in many cases where the CDC has been late, they've been wrong, the messaging has been terrible. And even here in Connecticut, I'm old enough to remember when Ned Lamont kept nail and hair salons closed for additional time on no new information, no new science, no new data, just kept them closed, impacting businesses. So taking direction from the state is mandatory. Obviously, they got to get their stuff in one bag. They've been consistently awful on all of this, which is why I asked things like, why are we treating healthy people like they're sick? Why are we treating vaccinated people like a vaccine doesn't work? And we know conclusively it does. So that's part of, I think, the frustration that some parents are feeling is that the messaging has not been good. It's not been correct in many cases, and it's frequently been late to the party. We here in Connecticut opened up all the businesses overnight because the CDC said, open all the businesses overnight without any prep work, without anything. And a lot of people got panicked over that in the opposite direction of what we're talking about here. So the messaging is bad, and I think the state needs to kind of clean some of that stuff up. I'll leave it there.
John. Margaret?
Yeah, and I understand Sean's frustration, but I absolutely agree with Kathleen and Tina. And I think both Jonathan and Dr. De Silva summed it up really well in terms of where we are. For myself in that meeting the other night, the question before us was about a letter writing campaign. And it was there, I think the survey came about because there was a comment that there was overwhelming support for an optional mask policy and to write a letter in support of what was perceived as overwhelming. So we wanted to gauge the sentiment of the community, which is what I think we've done here. And it was good to do that. I know that there's, again, some nuances with the survey that perhaps could have been explored, but it does show that there's not necessarily overwhelming support one way or the other. So again, I just want to reiterate, certainly my intention, and I think the intention of most of the people on the board that I heard, we're not dictating policy or advocating a position. This was literally just to get the sentiment of the community. We are not health experts, as Dr. De Silva mentioned. It has done us well throughout this pandemic not to try to be health experts, to follow the policies, to follow the guidelines. I don't know if the board still wants to discuss whether we write a letter or not. Again, 60/40, I don't know really what kind of information that provides to the state, but that's not telling them what to do. It's really just providing them information so that as they make their decisions around possible scenarios for, if you do this, then consider this. Mask wearing was always it was part of a mitigation strategies. There were lots of mitigation strategies that went with things, right? So if you have social distancing, you might not need this. Those were the types of levers that were used before when guidance was provided to localities. And I'm not saying whether mask wearing should happen or not. I am just saying that it is part of a mitigation strategy. And perhaps when the state does come down with their guidance, they come down with, for vaccinated individuals, this is what it is. For non-vaccinated individuals, this is what it is. Or if you have mask wearing, then you don't need to do this. I don't know what that is. That is not my role. But if we were to write a letter, I truly see that letter as just providing information about what the sentiment of one locality in Connecticut is, and they can use that as they analyze all of their different data points about what kind of guidance they're going to give for us come the fall, including all the science.
May I make a comment on that, Margaret? Can you hear Kathleen?
Yeah, we can hear you, Kathleen.
Yeah, it seems to be a different screen for me today, but I at this point really feel, because as we've said, this survey is not a scientific survey. It was a sense for us to take the temperature because we were only getting letters from one constituency. Now that it's more or less a 40-60, I don't see the point in writing a letter to tell the State Department or the Health Department of the state of Connecticut or whomever how our community feels at this point. First of all, every day new information is coming about, as Dr. Hanaway said, about this new virulent variation of the COVID. And I think at this point, we don't even have all the data before we open. So I don't see the point in writing a letter. Others may, but that's my personal opinion.
Thanks, Kathleen. Sean and then Ken.
Just a quick observation. We got more survey results than the last budget vote. If this was a referendum, it would have passed and we'd be doing what our constituents asked us to do. I'll just leave it there.
Thanks, Sean. Ken, then Rachel.
Yeah, just the only comment on that, if we had been able to isolate one vote per family, even I think Sean, that would have a little more weight. But I think to Kathleen's point, it wasn't a scientific survey. It wasn't. It's essentially there's no overwhelming support either way. If we do write a letter, if we do as a board decide to write a letter, I don't see the harm in writing a letter urging the, or I don't think it's out of place to write a letter to Governor Lamont, et cetera, saying, we need a decision. Our families need a decision. I think that was overwhelming from the responses that we got, is that the families need to plan, and families need time, and families need decisions so that they can make their own decisions. And so, I think if we do write a letter, I think that's the direction that the letter needs to take, is our families need to know, because they do.
Thanks. Rachel?
Good morning, everybody. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for pulling the survey together in such a quick turnaround. I think that was remarkable. And so thank you once again. I do think that there's two sides to our discussion this morning. And I think really both are important to see where we go. And a lot of the comments that Tina shared, I'm right in line with her. I think first is what is in the purview of the Board of Education at this time. And, if we go back to our original reopening plan, we always followed health and safety protocols that were in adherence with federal, state, and local health guidelines. It was never the purview of this Board of Education to say what the health and safety guidelines were or could be. Furthermore, when following health and safety protocols, as in this safe return plan, the Ridgefield Board of Education doesn't have purview over state mandates. So in a letter dated June 30th, 2021, in which Dr. De Silva had given us from the State Board of Education, quote, in Connecticut, the health and safety requirements, including for universal masking in school buildings, are currently mandatory in line with executive order. I think that's one side of this discussion, and it's important and understanding, and for the community to understand that as we move forward. The other side of this discussion is what is in the purview of this Board of Education and how we can provide a voice to our community and advocate for the children and what the community wants at this time. I think as a board, we're here to listen. And as our secretary, I believe that we do just that. We listen, we read, and I do take communication to heart when making decisions at this table. But I think in order for the voices to be heard from this survey, because people did take time out to fill it out and they were given an email that said that this is where the information would go, we need to write a letter to the CSDE providing the data represented. So not an outcome, but the data. So how many families the survey was sent out to, how many replied, and the results, the great graphs we were just shown. And then encouraging an answer soon. I think my hope as a board member this morning is that we just continue to move forward. There's a lot of work that needs to be done still. And with our community knowing that we listen to them and that we did in our purview what we could do at this time, which was simply to gather data and to report it forward. Thank you.
Well said, Rachel. Nora and Tina?
Yeah, I mean, Rachel, you said it so well. That was really exactly how I was feeling. And just to kind of piggyback on that, you know, last week when so much of the information came in on one side, you know, it gave pause. And I think more than anything made me want to understand what the whole community was thinking because of, you know, the one-sided view. So I think that now that we have that information, there was never a doubt in my mind that we would follow the guidelines of the state. But I think that when we get that information from parents, we really have to look at, you know, is this the overwhelming, you know, majority, or is this just the people who wrote in? So, you know, my goal in hoping to do this survey and coming back today was to really understand where the parents all were on this issue. And the survey really showed that to some extent. So I think, as Rachel put it, you know, we need to just represent the families in the community by stating the facts and then allowing them to make the health decisions as they have.
Thanks, Nora. Tina?
Rachel, you said it. You actually summed up what I was thinking, but I went so long about it, but you made it so succinct. So thank you. Yes, I think we do. At the end of the day, as Rachel says, what was the goal, right? We did send a survey out to our families. They're expecting some kind of, we need to listen to them, and it needs to be some kind of something that the board does. And that's why I will support writing a letter. We're not telling them, we're not telling the state what to do. We are telling them, as we've said, this is what we surveyed our community. This was the results. This is how it's broken down. I think those graphs are amazing. That's data point for them. And, you know, whatever decision they make, this is a feeling of one part, as Margaret said, one part of Connecticut community. This is what the town feels. It may echo other towns, it may not. We can't speak for that. Our job is to speak for our parent community. And I think we really need to move this forward, because if we don't write a letter, then why did we do a survey? Yes, of course, we understand where we've gone with this. We needed to where our parents are. But as we all know, I think we all agree on this fact that our parents need answers. It is kind of, it's in limbo. People are moving forward. There's conflicting evidence, as Sean says, you know, school versus outside, camps, not, it does all, there's so much, and it's so confusing. What do we do with what we just did as a board? We wanted to know where our parents were. We have some kind of idea for sure. We've had emails constantly. I've had so many conversations over the last week. It's amazing how parents feel. So, but in the end, that's what I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but our parents want us to do something with this information. And if that is just sharing, and again, I will be very uncomfortable, to Kathleen's point, dictating what this should look. I am not a doctor. I have no background on that. I will respect what our pediatricians and our nurses wrote to us. I will respect that sentiment. So if we just share what we have got from our parents, the data that we have, and say, this is what our community feels. We would like, you to make a decision. Whether this influences their decision going forward, that's up to the state. It's not our job to make that, but we are doing something, a step forward. And again, our role as a board is to voice our parents, right? That's what I gave back to our purview as a board. This is not dictating our policy. We're not making it. We're not making decisions. We're just trying to carry a voice. So I will support that letter.
So can I just, one piece, I remember when I was writing my doctoral dissertation, you can find research that says this and research that says that. So I'm going to flip two different ways. Earlier, I said there's a huge sentiment of families that want a decision, right? And I understand that. But I'm going to speak from another side, which is that what we really want? In other words, do we want a decision early on that perhaps could have been different one way or the other had we waited? Or had it waited, or had they, whoever they is, had more information? That's just another piece to consider as you write a letter. And me too, right? I like to have a summer holiday. Everybody would like to get a plan written, get something out to families, all of that. But at the same time, I do wonder if we receive information too early, is that the most accurate information, or is that the best information? And honestly, I really don't know. So I could speak from both sides of it. I could speak from the decision making. If I'm a parent, I want to be able to make a decision wherever I am on that decision line. But on the flip side, is there a benefit to having the information a little bit later where perhaps it is more comprehensive? And I don't know what that would actually look like. So that's just something else I'd throw out there. If we are going to write a letter that includes the survey results, then I would include the actual questions that were asked, because I think there is, as I said, is that we sent it out quickly. And so we had parents make a decision based on, variables, nuances that weren't there. So I was a parent of 3 kids, perhaps at 3 levels. Maybe I would have responded differently for each one. I didn't have that opportunity in the survey. So I would just include the actual questions. We don't need to give a narrative if that's the way we end up, but just so that whoever receives this understands that what questions were asked.
Okay, so the meeting last week, I was not there, but the rationale behind asking for a letter was basically, I think, 2 things. 1, some neighboring districts had already said they're going mask optional in the fall, and 2, we need an answer. There's some people in the town that would like an answer sooner rather than later. Since that meeting, the State Board of Ed has sent a letter that Rachel mentioned that says, just reminder, masks are still mandatory, and we're working as fast as we can. So with those 2 pieces, we can either go forward with sending a letter, as the motion was carried last week, and I'll read you what's been drafted so far, or we can entertain a motion to rescind. Either way. So let me just, if it's okay, to read the letter that's currently drafted. I can find it.
Jonathan, would it be easier if we share? What's easiest?
Sure, go ahead and share it. That'd be great.
Okay.
I had a quick question. Just interject, because I think though that we should also consider the letter that was sent to the Connecticut superintendents, wherein they acknowledge that they recognize, they acknowledge that people are looking, the school board or school district, are looking for answers. And I think they even had an action date in there, and that they hope to have more information at their meeting on July 13th, which has yet to come. So
they say they look forward to their next meeting. They don't
look forward to their next meeting, right? No, and they were, yes. So I just think that's important to remember too, or to consider.
Right. So in the letter towards the end, it says, we all know we will need to be prepared to make any necessary adjustments to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 risk in schools. Nonetheless, we acknowledge the hard work of school leaders, students, staff, and community, and will continue to reassess whether it is appropriate to change the statewide policies related to the COVID-19 pandemic. We look forward to our next health and safety meeting on July 13th at 8 a.m. as they had changed some meeting dates. So I think that's why that's there. They actually haven't had any. So I think they were providing an update of when they would have one next.
Can we go ahead and share the letter?
Sure. John Mansfield, can you? Thank you.
Everyone see it?
Can everyone see it? Thumbs up?
Yes.
How do people feel about this letter as written?
This is Kathleen.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
I agree that if we need to, if we said we were going to send a letter after we sent the survey, that we need to send, just the facts, ma'am, nothing else. I still don't know, because I really feel the later that we find out, the more data we will have in terms of what is how this how things are progressing. That if we decide sooner, and then things might have to flip-flop, is that positive as well? So I don't know if I'd want to say we want it sooner. We want it when when everyone in the community feels that this is the most accurate and up-to-date data and can follow through for the rest of the, for whatever. I just don't want information if it's not going to stick. Does that make sense?
Sure.
But I feel that if we want to send this, what the survey was, and the graphs, and this is just for your information. I don't want to draw any conclusions from that as a board. But most of this is very good. I just wonder if do we really want to urge them earlier rather than later?
Well, all it says now is waiting too late in the summer months.
Okay.
Not helpful. So, but we're not really giving a date.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's true.
And also Kathleen, if we could do it in a month, and then 2 weeks later it could change. We could do it in 2 months, and then 2 weeks later it changes. So I think it's such a moving target. I think at some point the decision does have to be made, and just with the caveat that this could change. And so
then I'm fine with that. I just don't want to push anybody against the wall. That's how it had to be
for the last year. Exactly.
Got it.
Agreed.
So are people comfortable with us sending this letter to the State Department of Education? We need the motion was last week to send a letter, correct, Dr. De Silva? Okay, so do we need?
Yes.
I think just a show of hands to see that we approve of this letter to be the one that's sent. All those in favor?
Jonathan, just
That's all.
one
Yeah.
clarifying point. The letter is drafted to not only the commissioner, it's also drafted to the governor. Is that how it's to remain?
Yeah, that sounds good. That's, I believe, what was asked for last week.
Jonathan, just a quick clarifying question. So we will also attach the graphs, right, to that letter from the survey?
We can do that, correct?
Okay.
I can do
I
that.
think we said the questions and the
The
graph.
questions and the graphs, right?
Can do that.
Agree. And we're not saying this is what it means. We're just saying this is what we
We're not interpreting.
do, what Kathleen's point.
Yeah. We're not interpreting, we're just providing data.
On the graphs, do we need to make a caveat that, or a notation that it is possible multiple responses were received?
Well, yes, but then you would have to qualify that we couldn't give a family with 3 kids an ability to respond at all.
Agreed. Agreed.
So
yeah,
we can put every modifier and qualifier in the world in there. It's going to be a much longer letter.
Exactly. And so so how useful then is that data, given again all the caveats that we said? Well,
The data, frankly, Ken, the data isn't relevant at all. The majority of our parents
Agreed.
have asked us to write a letter. We're writing a letter.
Yep, exactly. So that's my point, Sean. Exactly. The data isn't really relevant. So why are we including it?
Because people on the board requested it be included. I have no desire to not include it. Let's put it in. Why not?
For the reasons you just said. And the
again,
and I
we can put modifiers on every. The RPS is exceedingly terrible at putting out surveys. I think we can all stipulate that.
Right.
So we can put modifiers and qualifiers on every one of these things, and we can spin a big ball of dirt that nobody's going to be able to make heads or tails of anything. I don't think that's productive in this case. We want an answer sooner than later. The letter says that. The parents have asked us to send a letter. This all follows. Just send the data.
So we'll send the letter. We'll send the survey data, as well as a little bit about the survey methodology, so that people can make their own informed decisions around the veracity of the data at the state level. Does that make sense?
I can add, all right, Sean, can you maybe not say RPS, really? Bad surveys?
We're talking dozens of these, Dr. D. It's never been good.
All right, well, all right. So we'll add some modify. So I can add like just, like a please note one survey for family. Please note, because it could go either way, right? Possible duplicates. And I'll just add those two little modifiers at the end. Again, they can interpret the data however way they see fit.
That's fair.
I think in the letter, what we do say is that it's clear that there's varying sentiments. That's for sure.
Okay.
And I would hope that this would not influence their scientific thinking.
Sure that they'll.
We don't have to say that, but I'm thinking.
Take it for what it's worth.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless there's anything else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Do I have a second? Ken, thank you. You look like you want to go back to the beach. All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Thank you all. Thanks for
Thank you.